Your aquatic pets deserve expert care, and that's exactly what they'll get with Fly In Vet. Dr. Becker is a board-certified aquatic veterinarian who brings her expertise right to your door. She uses state-of-the-art WaterLink spin disc technology to test your pond or aquarium on site, getting you fast, accurate results. Ensure your aquatic pets are healthy with Fly In Vet's mobile veterinary services in Boise. Act now. Call 208-260-0327 or visit flyinvet.com. Safeguard your fish's health with Fly In Vet. Today on CityCast Boise, Idaho made headlines as the first state to ban transgender women from women's sports, sparking a 5-year-long legal battle led by Boise State student Lindsay Hecox. Now she's removing herself from the case, so we're looking at how this fight has reshaped Idaho and what the next chapter could mean nationally. It's Tuesday, September 23rd. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. James Dawson with Boise State Public Radio is here to help us understand the latest updates in this lawsuit and what it means for sports and the transgender community in Idaho. Thanks so much for being here today, Jimmy.
Hey, happy to be here, Lindsay.
Now, in 2020, Idaho passed HB 500, and this was the first law in the entire country banning transgender women and girls from participating in women's sports. Can we go back to that time before we dive into what's happening now and have a discussion about what was the political climate like then? How did the public respond, both in Idaho and nationally, to this law passing?
Yeah, I think you even have to go back a couple years before then, too, because if you remember, North Carolina in 2016 had the first in the nation bathroom law that banned transgender people from using restrooms that aligned with their gender identity, passed over a whole lot of controversy. And then you saw this massive corporate backlash, like all of these major companies, I believe PayPal was one of them, was like, oh, we had an expansion planned and we're not going to bring those employees to North Carolina if this actually goes into effect, if you don't repeal it. You had the NCAA threatening to pull its tournament, NCAA basketball tournament, out, and lawmakers in North Carolina repealed it the very next year. And since 2017, in that sort of 3-year period, you had these conservative think tanks being like, well, crap, we thought we had support for this. Seemingly, it was either met with, not distrust, but like, why are you trying to like regulate bathrooms? Who cares, from the American public? But they eventually landed on transgender sports as an issue that the American public, by and large, even today, is opposed to letting transgender athletes, women specifically, participate in sports that align with their gender identity. And so they had been putting out feelers during this time, and they eventually found Barbara Ehart, she's a Republican from Idaho Falls. She really identifies with this issue because if anyone has been paying attention to this issue, she has talked repeatedly about how Title IX was one of her like saving graces in high school and college because it had passed right around the time that she was growing up. She was a collegiate basketball player, eventual coach, and was really stoked about having more equity in women's sports at the time. And so, she thought that it was unfair for trans girls and women to be playing in this space that she viewed as something that should be exclusive to cisgender girls and women. It's something that really resonated with her, and she fought tooth and nail to get that through the legislature, even though it didn't really have that much of an opposition because, as I said, I mean, you have polling even earlier this year showing, again, 2/3 of U.S. adults thinking that there should be laws and policies in place banning transgender athletes from these sorts of things.
And so what kind of ripple effect did this law have nationally? Because it seems like it did set off kind of momentum for this movement in other parts of the country.
Oh, it definitely did. You immediately saw other states passing these laws. I mean, again, there were a lot of pieces of legislation introduced in 2020 around this issue. Idaho happened to be the first to pass it. And eventually you saw Representative Ehart flying to places like, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, Montana, South Dakota, like all of these other states to testify to their state legislators and urging them to pass the same law that Idaho had, even though during that time, this was kind of blocked by federal courts. She still wanted those pieces of legislation in place across the country.
And then we had Lindsay Hecox, an Idahoan who participated in sports and was trying out for, I believe, the BSU track team, right?
Track and cross country, yep.
Yeah, and she brought a lawsuit against this law. She brought a case against this law. What were the key arguments that she and her legal team made when they were challenging this law?
Yeah, essentially that gender identity is a protected class under Title IX and federal law. This is discrimination based on sex. And this is something that has been ongoing in the courts for several years related to transgender rights. And, pretty quickly, she filed this lawsuit with the help of several groups like the ACLU, civil rights organizations like that. And relatively quickly, there were preliminary injunctions put in place by the lower level federal district court, and then the Ninth Circuit of Court of Appeals in California upheld that as well, saying that, yeah, this is technically discrimination based on a protected class. It's a very long legal saga because Lindsay had some troubles where, she either dropped out for a semester or a year, and the state was like, well, this shouldn't apply to her anymore since she can't actually join the team if she's not enrolled in classes. And so you had a lot of back and forth going on there. She eventually did re-enroll. She kept trying out for the track and cross country teams, never did make it, but then she eventually settled and played club soccer as her sport outlet at Boise State.
Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, maybe even a whole new life. So why not start that journey today? I'm CityCast CEO David Plotz, and I'm learning Spanish with Babbel. Babbel's conversation-based technique quickly teaches you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. I've been practicing my Spanish with Babbel's AI conversation partner. I can choose my conversation topic and have a real-time dialogue. It's great at helping me think on my feet, and it's improving my pronunciation. Also, it's really easy to do anytime on my phone using Babbel's excellent mobile app. It's just one of the many fantastic Babbel tools for learning. Plus, Babbel has a real-time feedback, progress trackers, and handy visualizations, all of which make it really easy to stay motivated to learn. I want you to learn another language. So CityCast is teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Babbel.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
So this case has been going on for 5 years at this point. What impact has it had on the Idaho law? Has the Idaho law ever gone into effect, or has there just been an injunction to stop it while the case happens? Has it been back and forth?
Yeah, it's just had this injunction in place as the case has gone on, specific to Lindsay Hecox as it pertains to her. And so that was a thing where the Supreme Court was like, hey, lower federal courts, you cannot just have these wide blanket injunctions applying to each and every person, even if they didn't bring a lawsuit. That's been a big thing for the last couple of years. And so this has pertained to Lindsay for sure. It's a whole thing to go through this case's history. But needless to say, the state had appealed it up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Earlier this year, it said that it was going to hear it. And then just a couple weeks ago, you had Lindsay Hecox say, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Please disregard my lawsuit and I will not file it ever again.
Yeah, Lindsay Hecox mentioned several reasons. She said several things led to her withdrawing from this case. She talked about her father's passing, ongoing harassment. Can I ask, though, what does it mean legally that she has withdrawn and dismissed her claims with prejudice?
Yeah, so with prejudice means that she cannot file it again. It's a very technical legal term, but essentially you're basically giving up your right to make the same arguments before the court in this circumstance again.
So what does all of this mean for this case and for House Bill 500?
Yeah, so basically we're just waiting on legal paperwork and a couple last minute arguments from the Idaho Attorney General's office. They do not want this claim dismissed. They want to argue it before the U.S. Supreme Court. And until a lower court fully dismisses the case, then that injunction is, or lifts the injunction even, then this is still ongoing. And that's kind of where we're at right now. The state has opposed it. Lindsay Hecox's lawyer said she absolutely has the right to dismiss her own case. Please do so, lower court judge. But that's in the hands of said federal court judge as we're recording this right now. And so they have plenty of time, as much time as they want, to consider these arguments on the merits.
So I also want to take a moment to dive into kind of what does this tell us about the personal toll of being the face of this kind of litigation? I mean, it's been 5 years. Lindsay says that she's faced lots of harassment. I can only guess how much. And what are your thoughts on when we make these laws about human rights, about people's lives and humanity, and then they have to be this face of the lawsuit, what kind of an impact do you think that has?
I think it's massive. You know, you had Lindsay, she did an interview, I believe, with ESPN, maybe Sports Illustrated, like all of these national magazines when the lawsuit first came out. And obviously, you're going to get some people agreeing with you and some people opposing you, right? And so you became a national figure. And if you're not ready for that backlash, then it's going to be pretty tough going forward. And that's partially, if I'm remembering correctly, from court documents. When she dropped out of school, it was for financial reasons. She also talked about her mental health at the time, which she cited in her request to withdraw. I mean, she said that she's gotten a lot of harassment affecting her mental health and safety. Her quote is, thus, after deep consideration and despite the positive role that women's team sports have played in my life, including at BSU, I've made the extremely difficult decision to cease playing women's sports in any context covered by HB 500 and want to dismiss my case. Quote, living a healthy and safe life is a priority of mine, one in which in turn will help me graduate. So those are her priorities outlined in the court documents. I, as you said, couldn't imagine being a national face to anything. I don't like a lot of attention on me. And I think it's something that lawyers also kind of try to suss out at the beginning of cases. Like, hey, are you in this for the long haul? This is what you should prepare for, whether fairly or unfairly, right? But this is what is likely to happen in terms of public backlash, et cetera. So be prepared, or maybe don't do this. And I don't know what kind of conversations they had with her at the time.
Yeah, I think something that I worry gets lost in the sauce a little bit when we have these conversations and when we talk about these laws and the impact, and when these laws get passed in Idaho that are unpopular or challenge human rights, or maybe they are popular, but they do challenge human rights, that I know sometimes I'm like, oh, there'll be a lawsuit. But we don't think about the human cost of asking the targeted group to be the face of a lawsuit defending their humanity. And so it just feels like one more way that targeted people are having to carry this very heavy load in issues like this.
Well, and I'm sure that plays a role in especially these recent transgender lawsuits that we've seen, where you have a lot of plaintiffs trying to file them anonymously, right? Either calling themselves Jane or John Doe or using initials, things like that have been pretty common, at least in Idaho transgender related lawsuits. And so I can imagine, along with some of them being minors, obviously, that could be part of the calculus for sure.
Well, it sounds like this law is in a bit of limbo right now, but the Supreme Court is set to hear a very similar case out of West Virginia. What are the stakes there, and could that ruling end up deciding the fate of Idaho's law too?
Yeah, so this West Virginia lawsuit is pretty similar to the Hecox case, which I think is probably why the U.S. Supreme Court accepted them similarly. And so it's trying to determine whether or not the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment applies to the state having a right to separate boys and girls sports based on biological sex. So I would imagine, yes, so depending on what kind of opinion might come down in this case, if it's a very declarative one, then it will apply across the country, including Idaho.
And beyond the courts, how do you see this issue playing into Idaho politics going into the next legislative session?
Well, I mean, we've already passed bans on transgender healthcare for minors. That was challenged in the courts, unsuccessfully, I should say. So, I mean, I don't know exactly what else they could do. We've already had both legislation and litigation on whether people can change the sex on their birth certificates and other public identifying documents. You can, by the way, that's been a longstanding court thing. I'm not sure what exactly might come out, but it is an election year, right? And so I can totally imagine conservatives trying to build on the success that they've had over the past 5 years, including this case, again, banning transgender care for minors, bathroom bills that apply to both K through 12 public schools and colleges and universities. Those recent lawsuits have also failed to get any sort of preliminary injunctions so far.
Well, Jimmy, thank you so much. I know that you've been following this case for a long time, and I really appreciate you coming on the show to break it down and share your expertise with us.
Of course.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, make sure and subscribe to our Hey Boise newsletter for daily updates that are sent right to your inbox. We'll be back tomorrow morning to find out where's the best sports bar in town. Catch you then.